This is a horror story from Taiwan. I live in an old 4-story apartment building, a kind still seen often in Taiwan. The narrow space between buildings means that both the front and back balconies are enclosed in traditional iron grills. The complex designs of the iron bars resemble a heavy cage. When I first moved in, I found it oddly reassuring, almost like a protective barrier. My routine is simple. I leave early and return late. After coming home, I like to stand on the back balcony, sipping a cup of coffee, letting my mind drift. Sometimes, I step out onto the front balcony for a change of view. The night breeze slips through the iron bars, occasionally bringing the muffled sounds of my neighbors. It's just the low hum of apartment life, the insignificant background noise of coexistence. Or at least, that's how it used to feel, until recently, when the atmosphere shifted, and those familiar sounds began to feel strangely unsettling. It started with my upstairs neighbor, whose behavior seemed off. Day or night, peculiar noises echoed from above. Metal scraping, slow and deliberate. At other times, a soft, dragging sound, as if someone were crawling on the floor. Most unnerving, however, was the timing of these noises, appearing often at 2 or 3 in the morning. Not loud, but just enough to worm their way into my consciousness, demanding attention. I told myself it was merely the sound of an old building settling and brushed it off. But then, one night, the ordinary turned inexplicably surreal. That evening, I was on the balcony as usual, letting the darkness wash over me. Outside, a fine drizzle fell, raindrops pattering against the iron bars in a steady rhythm. Just as I turned to go back inside, a shadow slipped into the corner of my vision. I stopped, heart jolting, and whipped my head around. Nothing. The balcony was empty. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be rational. It was just a trick of light, I told myself, the reflection of raindrops. But I couldn't shake the prickling sensation of being watched. Back inside, I sat in the living room, heart pounding. That moment on the balcony had felt so real, like someone was just outside, pressing up against the iron bars, eyes fixed intently on me. A few days passed, and the tension only grew. One night, around 1 in the morning, I was jerked from sleep by a strange sound. A soft, dragging scrape, slow and methodical, from the balcony. Holding my breath, I peeled back the covers and crept toward the window. Outside, the drizzle continued, casting faint halos under the street lamps. My pulse quickened, and I squinted, trying to pierce the dim light. And then, I froze. There was someone on the balcony. It was no trick of the light, no illusion of rain. A figure clung to the iron bars, suspended upside down like a spider, arms and legs twisted around the bars. His head hung low, hidden in shadow from my vantage point, but I could see his eyes, 2 dim glints that gleamed faintly in the dark. My breath hitched, and my mind went blank. Those eyes, hollow and unmoving, bored straight into me, as if waiting. My body was paralyzed, pinned to the spot by a creeping chill that sank deep into my bones. Seconds passed, or maybe minutes. Then, in a single, smooth movement, the figure let out a dry, raspy chuckle that slithered into my ears. Without breaking eye contact, he began to crawl backward, limbs rigid yet fluid, retreating into the shadows above like some twisted upside-down arachnid. Only when he melted into the darkness did I finally snap out of my daze, stumbling backward, nearly falling in my panic. That night, sleep was impossible. The image of that figure lingered, burnt into my memory. following day, I tried to ask around about the upstairs neighbor, but the responses were chilling. No one had seen anyone in that apartment for years. Some claimed it had been vacant for ages. A deep unease rooted itself within me, but I couldn't abandon reason. I stayed vigilant, listening carefully each night for those strange sounds. The soft dragging, the subtle scraping, the occasional murmur that seemed to slither down from above. Eventually, my desperation led me to an elderly resident in the neighborhood. He was in his 70s or 80s, and after I recounted my experiences, he gave a long sigh.
That apartment has indeed been empty for a long time. The previous tenant, he was a peculiar man, used to hang upside down, practicing some sort of esoteric meditation, or so they say.
The memory of those glowing eyes flashed across my mind, sending a shiver down my spine.
What happened to him?
I asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. The old man lowered his gaze.
He died some time ago, fell from his balcony. They say he broke his neck.
An icy dread washed over me, and I couldn't help glancing back toward my own balcony. In the shadows beyond the iron bars, something seemed to shift faintly. I blinked, but there was nothing there. That night, the rain began again, and as I lay awake, the familiar sound crept back. Slow, deliberate, scratching against the iron bars of the balcony. This is a Japanese horror story. One night, when I was studying alone on the second floor of my house, something strange happened. My family home isn't exactly clean. Supernatural occurrences have always been common there. That night, I thought it was just the usual house noises, but even the posters on my wall seemed to be rattling. It felt off. House noises refer to creaks and groans made by buildings, often due to changes in temperature or humidity. In the past, people in Japan believed these sounds were caused by a spirit, a small yokai called yanari, which would shake the house. This creature was even documented in Seikien Toriyama's Gazu Hyaki Yagyo. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. At first, I thought my older brother had come home, but the sound of the steps just kept going, not stopping at the top. After a few minutes, it didn't feel right. I opened the door to check, and there on the stairs was a woman I'd never seen before, looking completely lost and out of place.
Is Haru here?
She asked. Haru is my older brother. In that moment, I assumed she must be my brother's girlfriend, so I told her.
He hasn't come back yet.
Oh,
She replied, looking disappointed as she turned to head back downstairs. I thought to myself, my brother sure dates unusual people. After going back to my room, it suddenly hit me. My brother was on a business trip and wouldn't be back for another 2 weeks. How could his girlfriend not know that? How did I forget he was away? Just then, I heard a voice behind me say,
mind if I wait here for him to come back?
The next thing I remember was blacking out. The next time I opened my eyes, it was already morning. I brushed it off as just a weird dream. That's when my brother called, telling me,
"A close friend I grew up with has passed away. Could you pay respects for me?"
Having no choice, I went to the address he gave me. But looking back now, things didn't feel right. Typically, families hold vigil signs nearby, but there were none here. It struck me as odd. When I reached the house, no one was there to greet the guests. I thought my brother must have given me the wrong address, and was about to check my phone when an older woman stepped out from the front door and called to me, "Haru-kun?"
Oh, I'm Haru's younger brother.
Ah, right. Haru has already graduated, she said with a smile. inviting me inside. After some conversation, I confirmed this was indeed my brother's friend's home. But he had actually passed away 5 years ago. My brother had even attended his funeral. She led me to the altar to pay respects. And in the photo, I saw the face of a man I didn't recognize. Thinking I needed to call my brother to sort things out, my phone rang. It was my mother. She told me that my brother had been in a car accident at his business trip location. I quickly excused myself, rushing to meet my mother at the station. Together, we traveled to where my brother was hospitalized. We arrived earlier than expected, but he was still trapped in the wreckage, unable to be rescued in time. Now, he lay in critical condition. Even the doctor urged us to prepare for the worst. As I sat beside my mother on a bench in the hospital corridor, I heard an odd sound of footsteps. It was broad daylight, and the hospital was bustling, so footsteps weren't unusual. But something fell off about these footsteps. The sound was strangely familiar. Then it hit me. I had heard those same footsteps climbing the stairs at my family home. Before me stood the woman I had seen back at the house.
Not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet.
She mumbled, repeating herself over and over. It dawned on me that she was the cause of all of this. I glared at her and thought silently.
Go away.
At that, she stopped mumbling. Her eyes turned toward me. Only her eyes moved. Her face remained still. Realizing I was dealing with something beyond my control, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't know what to do, but to stare back at her. Then, suddenly, I heard a loud, rhythmic pounding. I looked around briefly, and when I turned back, she was gone. In her place stood a young man, around my brother's age.
Tell him, stop making me work so hard, you jerk.
He said, tapping his forehead twice with his fist before vanishing. That man was my brother's friend who had passed away. Soon after, my brother miraculously regained consciousness. When I told him about the strange events, he looked at me in shock and said he'd never called me. I checked my phone, and there was indeed no record of his call. When I finished recounting everything that had happened, my brother broke down in tears. This happened during my university days in Taiwan, on a department-organized trip to Europe. It was at the third hotel we stayed in, a grand place with a high-ceilinged lobby and a strong foreign charm. Everyone was excited as we checked in. After the tour guide handed out room assignments, we took the elevator to our respective floors. Kelly and May, who both have a sensitivity to the supernatural, were assigned to the last room on the third floor. As per their habit, they knocked on the door before entering. But the moment they stepped inside, both felt the atmosphere was off, completely different from the vibrant lobby.
Did you feel it?
Don't ask. I feel nothing. Kelly quickly cut her off.
Oh,
May murmured. The room itself was old and poorly arranged. To the right was the bathroom, next to which stood an out-of-place, antique wardrobe. Despite the strange vibe, they didn't think much of it. They unpacked their luggage and lay on the bed, waiting for dinner time. While watching TV, the volume suddenly lowered on its own. Kelly checked the remote, which was resting untouched beside them. They brushed it off and turned the volume back up. But not long after, the volume dropped again. This time, they began to feel uneasy.
Kelly, could this be?
May whispered.
I don't know.
Kelly replied, her voice tense. Just then, their phone rang. It was the tour guide calling to inform them about dinner. Grateful for the distraction, they got ready to head downstairs. But as Kelly closed the room door and took a few steps away, they both heard a knocking sound from inside the room, as if someone was knocking on the door from within. Startled, they hurried away. At dinner, Kelly and May shared the incident with the group.
Should we swap rooms?
I asked, concerned. They didn't want to trouble anyone, so we decided to visit their room later that night to play cards and drink. After all, the more people, the stronger the energy. After dinner, about 8 or 9 of us gathered in their room, chatting and drinking until around 11 p.m. When it was time to leave, I asked again if they wanted to switch rooms.
Hey, if you're scared, just say so. We can trade rooms.
I offered.
No need, we're fine.
Kelly insisted, adding that they'd call me if anything happened. Satisfied with their answer, I returned to my room. Later that night, after they each took a shower and lay down to rest, May found herself unable to sleep. She turned to talk to Kelly but froze. Kelly was staring blankly at the ceiling, her eyes lifeless. No matter how much May called out to her, Kelly didn't respond. Terrified, May hid under the covers and eventually fell asleep out of exhaustion. The next morning, as we gathered in the lobby to check out, I asked how their night went.
Did you sleep well?
Last night was terrifying.
May replied, visibly shaken. May described Kelly's unresponsive state, but Kelly had something even more chilling to share. She said that when she woke up to shower, she noticed a deep handprint on her ankle, as though someone had gripped her tightly. The mark was so dark, it was nearly bluish, but caused no pain. The imprint was clear, 5 distinct fingers pressed into her skin. Kelly rolled up her pant leg to show me, and it was unmistakably a handprint. Despite the eerie mark, Kelly felt fine and decided to continue with the trip. But when she returned home, as she approached her house, her mother suddenly stopped her at the door. "Don't go inside yet. Go to the temple and circle it twice first," her mother ordered firmly. Kelly's mother, who practiced spiritual rituals, told her that she had brought back a little girl. But the girl had since left. Back home, as Kelly unpacked, she discovered that the jade talisman her mother had given her for protection was shattered. It seemed the talisman had absorbed the negative energy on her behalf. That night, Kelly had a dream. In it, a young girl with golden hair stood before her, dressed in a floral dress and holding a red umbrella. She said nothing, only stared silently at Kelly. It is a true ghost story from Taiwan. This chilling tale happened when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. My parents were devoted followers of traditional Taiwanese folk religion and often took me to various religious events. One night, they drove me to a private temple in the mountainous region of Nantou, Taiwan. It was a Qigong altar, a shrine dedicated to Qigong, a beloved figure in Chinese culture known for his eccentric image as a monk who drank and ate meat while helping people. The temple's medium was known for solving people's problems and even held an acupuncture license, offering treatments to the followers. We arrived at the temple around 10 p.m. Despite its modest size, the temple was bustling with devotees. The waiting time was long, and I soon grew tired. By midnight, noticing my yawns, my mom suggested I go sleep in the car parked in the temple's courtyard. I climbed into the back seat and gradually drifted off to sleep. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up. As I was about to turn over, I noticed something through the rear windshield, a blurry figure. It was a young boy, leaning upside down as if lying flat on the car roof, with his face pressed against the glass, peering in at me. What made it even stranger was that I couldn't tell if he had a lower body. Was he really lying on the car, or could he have been floating? The car was dimly lit, making it hard to see clearly, but I could make out that he seemed to be about my age. Terrified, I quickly turned away, shutting my eyes tight. My whole body stiffened with fear. At some point, despite the terror, I fell asleep again and only woke up when my parents returned, telling me they were finished and it was time to go home. I thought that was the end of it. But a few days later, something strange happened. Late one night, I was woken by the sound of our family dog barking frantically. Normally calm and quiet, the dog was now growling and barking toward the hallway outside my room. It even pushed open the screen door and stepped into the corridor, sniffing and looking around. Annoyed by the noise, I groggily decided to get up and use the bathroom since I was awake anyway. As I sat up, my gaze caught a fleeting shadow moving quickly along the hallway outside my room. It was small, far shorter than an adult. The realization jolted me awake. It wasn't my shadow. Suppressing my fear, I got out of bed and cautiously opened the door to check the corridor. I searched the entire house, but nothing was there. What did I see that night? And who was that shadow? My thoughts went back to the boy I saw outside the car window at the temple. A chilling question crossed my mind. Did he follow me home? You've probably heard of sleep paralysis, right? Many claim it's just a physiological condition, but for me, it always carries an unexplainable sense of eeriness. When I was about 6 years old, back then, we lived in an old, traditional 2-section house in Taiwan. One afternoon, during a nap, I suddenly woke up, fully conscious. The bedroom door was open, and from my bed, I could see into the living room. I saw my grandfather walk past the door. I called out to him several times, but it was like my voice couldn't come out. Or maybe he just couldn't hear me. He walked on without stopping. I wanted to get up, but my body felt like it was pinned down, completely immobile. Not long after, a small figure appeared at the doorway. It was a chubby little boy with a buzz cut around my age. He just stood there, staring at me without moving. Frantically, I tried to speak. "Go get my grandpa! Please, go get him!" I begged. But he didn't respond. He just kept standing there, looking at me silently. I don't know how much time passed before I suddenly regained movement. It felt like my body had been released from invisible chains. I fully woke up, but I never told anyone about what happened that day. I buried that memory deep in my heart until I graduated from vocational high school. One day, while chatting with some relatives over tea, my aunt began sharing her own experience with sleep paralysis. That was when I couldn't hold back anymore and brought up my own childhood encounter. My aunt described what happened to her when she was 20 and working at a betel nut stall. One afternoon, she dozed off on a couch in the back room. Suddenly, she woke up, but found herself completely paralyzed, though her mind was wide awake. She tried to move, but her body felt locked in place. She recalled seeing a shadowy figure with long hair. The figure passed right through her body and disappeared into the wall. Even then, she couldn't move. Then, she noticed another dark, transparent silhouette. This one began crawling up her body, starting from her feet, until it pressed down on her chest. The shadow leaned closer and closer, as if trying to bring its face right up to hers. My aunt said the oppressive feeling was terrifying, yet she couldn't do anything. Only when her phone suddenly rang did the paralysis break. She could move again and was fully awake. If this is just sleep paralysis, what were those things we saw? The boy and those dark figures. What are they really? To this day, the true nature of sleep paralysis remains a mystery. Even if science tries to explain it away, the vividness of such personal experiences makes it hard for me to believe that it's all just a hallucination. That night, my husband and I went out for a walk with our 1-year-old baby. The streets were dark and quiet, with only the dim glow of streetlights guiding us. As we reached a deserted intersection, something caught our attention. It was a large teddy bear lying on the ground as if someone had carelessly discarded it. The bear looked strange, dressed in a tattered dress with one eye missing, leaving a hollow, gaping socket. It was unsettling, so lifelike that at first glance, I thought it was a person sitting there. I tugged on my husband's sleeve and whispered.
That scared me. For a moment, I thought it was a woman.
My husband stared at the bear for a while, then sighed.
What a waste.
He said.
It's still in pretty good shape. If we cleaned it up, we could probably sell it for a decent price.
His words made me uneasy. I instinctively held our baby tighter and didn't say anything more. We quickly left the intersection, but the strange feeling lingered. That night marked the beginning of a series of disturbing events. When we got home, our baby suddenly became unusually fussy. Normally calm and easygoing, she cried nonstop that night, no matter how much we tried to comfort her. What made it worse was how her eyes kept fixating on a corner of the room. She would point at it and shout, "Mama! Mama! Papa! Papa!" In a frantic voice. The next morning, I noticed faint red marks on her little arm, like scratches from something sharp. I asked my husband if he had accidentally hurt her, but he shook his head.
She was in her crib all night. There's no way this could have happened.
Things escalated further. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the faint sound of footsteps coming from the living room. It sounded like a child running across the floor. I shook my husband awake and asked him to check, but after looking around, he found nothing. When he returned to our room, we both froze in shock. The door to the baby's room, which we had shut before going to bed, was now slightly ajar. Terrified, I rushed into the baby's room. She was still in her crib, but her body was curled up tightly. Her face far from the peaceful expression she usually wore while sleeping. It was as if she was trying to shield herself from something. Over the next few days, the occurrences became more unsettling. The sounds in the night grew louder. Sometimes soft laughter, other times whispered conversations that were just barely audible. We installed a security camera in the living room, but every time it detected movement, the footage would show nothing. Only those eerie sounds echoed through the empty room. For some reason, my thoughts kept returning to the bear we had seen that night. Could it be connected to all of this? I told my husband we needed to go back to the intersection and get rid of the bear. But when we returned, it was already gone. All that remained was a deep drag mark in the dirt, as if something had pulled it away. Desperate, we called an elder who was experienced in cleansing rituals. She walked through our home, pausing when he reached the baby's crib. She said quietly,
She followed you home, but she's not here to harm you. She wants something.
Her words were cut off by a faint, high-pitched laugh behind us. Turning around, I saw a shadowy figure in the dark corner of the living room, slowly inching closer. The elder quickly lit incense and began chanting an incantation in a low, urgent voice. The smoke swirled, and the shadow grew fainter, but didn't vanish entirely. Instead, it moved closer, its steps echoing unnervingly loud in the silence.
She doesn't want to leave.
The elder muttered, her voice grave. She turned to us and said,
Her attachment runs deep. She's not here to hurt you. What she wants is a family.
My husband asked,
A family, what does she want from us?
his voice trembling. The elder hesitated, then pointed to our baby.
She's drawn to the child. Maybe she lost her own, or she might be trying to take her place.
At the elder's instructions, we prepared offerings. A bowl of rice, a cup of water, and a small mirror, placing them in the living room. She lit a yellow talisman, the flames casting an eerie glow.
This is her chance to leave peacefully. If she refuses, we'll need stronger measures.
The ritual began, and the air grew heavy, as if an invisible weight pressed down on us. Smoke from the incense gathered on the mirror, forming the blurry outline of a figure. A shape eerily similar to the teddy bear. The figure wavered, then let out a soft sigh. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, with a thin, jagged line. The elder pressed the burned talisman against the glass and murmured,
Go now, let go of your attachments.
The smoke dissipated, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. On the bowl of rice, there was now a faint handprint, as though she had left her final mark. The strange events stopped. Our baby returned to her cheerful self, and the house was finally quiet again. But as I was tidying the baby's room a few days later, I found something beneath her pillow. A small, old button with a faint, rust-colored stain. I threw it away immediately, but a chill crept down my spine. Had she really left? Or was she still here, hiding in the shadows, quietly watching us? This happened when I was in elementary school. One evening, I came home exhausted from playing. As I opened the door, I saw my mom standing in the kitchen from the entryway. "I'm home," I called out, but there was no response. Huh? Is she mad at me? I started to wonder if I'd done something wrong as I walked toward the kitchen. Feeling thirsty, I grabbed some juice from the fridge and began sipping it while sneaking glances at her. Something felt off. Taking a closer look, I noticed she was standing in front of the sink as if she was washing dishes. But the faucet wasn't running. Her hands, her body, her entire being. She wasn't moving at all. She simply stood there, silently, facing the sink with her back to me. The deep red glow of the setting sun filtered through the windows as the evening grew darker. The kitchen lights hadn't been turned on, adding to the eerie atmosphere. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. Unable to stay there any longer, I left the kitchen and went to the living room to turn on the TV. That's when I heard a cheerful voice call out from the entryway, "I'm home." It was my mom, walking in as if nothing had happened. She explained that she'd been outside in the yard, tending to the flowers and vegetables. But if she had been outside, then who or what had been in the kitchen? The thought made me freeze in fear. I ran to my mom, threw my arms around her, and burst into tears. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I dared to look at the face of that mom in the kitchen. Even now, the thought still gives me goosebumps. This is another terrifying story from Hokkaido, Japan. This happened 3 years ago on a rainy day. I noticed small handprints all over the kitchen window. Were these made by my daughter? I wondered. I wiped at the prints, only to realize they were on the outside of the glass. There was nothing outside the window. No balcony, no ledge, nothing that could leave handprints there. And then it hit me. My apartment was labeled as being on the 5th floor, but it was actually the 4th. I lived in unit 505. In Hokkaido, it's not uncommon for buildings to skip the number 4, as it's considered unlucky. But ever since I noticed the handprints, I started to think about how my daughter had been playing with an invisible big sister lately. At first, I thought she was just entertaining herself, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like she was having a real conversation with someone. It was deeply unsettling. I asked her, "Honey, who are you talking to?" She answered,
Mommy, I'm talking to the big sister. Can't you see her?
We had already been planning to move, but this incident sped up our timeline. My mother and mother-in-law, who were childhood friends, both insisted we perform a cleansing ritual. I hadn't had any miscarriages or abortions, so I couldn't imagine my daughter having an older sister. But the priest conducting the ritual explained that children sometimes unintentionally attract such things. Perhaps it had stayed with her because she didn't want to leave it behind. And maybe by leaving those handprints, it was trying to make me aware of its presence. But really, that's such a terrifying way to make yourself known. When I told this story to friends, they froze for a moment, then burst into an awkward laugh. But for me, as someone who actually experienced it, it was genuinely terrifying. It all began with my daughter, who turned 3 this past June. Like many kids her age, she had imaginary friends. The ones she often mentioned were Mr. Panda, Mr. Tanuki, and Miss Rabbit.
She's still a baby, just like Mr. Panda,
she would say. Or,
there was Mr. Tanuki, who scattered all the toys everywhere.
But whenever she spoke about Miss Rabbit, it felt different. Thinking back, I realized she described Miss Rabbit with far more detail than the others. She's a big sister, so she's really good at using chopsticks. Or Miss Rabbit is on the balcony looking at flowers. One day, my daughter was playing with our piano, which she often did for fun. It wasn't unusual, so I wasn't paying much attention. But then, I realized she was faintly playing a melody. It was the tune of the song, Tulip. She'd never learned to play piano, and neither my wife nor I had taught her. Puzzled, I asked her how she learned it.
It was Miss Rabbit who taught me,
she replied cheerfully. At this point, I was already spooked. So I decided to ask, what does Miss Rabbit look like?
She has long ears.
That was expected. Like this? I showed her an illustrated cartoon bunny from a picture book.
Nope.
Then, like this? This time, I showed her a real photo of a rabbit.
Not that either.
I tried asking more questions, but my daughter's limited vocabulary made it hard for her to explain. She started to get frustrated, so I dropped the subject for the day. The only thing I managed to learn was that Miss Rabbit was black, not white. A few days later, my daughter came running toward me, bursting with excitement.
This is it,
she shouted, holding up a magazine. What is? She pointed at a picture in the magazine.
This is Miss Rabbit.
What? I leaned closer to take a look. My daughter nodded with satisfaction. The image was of a woman in a bunny girl outfit, smiling sweetly. Hi, I'm Kelly, and this is something strange that happened to me recently. Last year, right before Lunar New Year, we moved into a new home. It's only been over the past year that we slowly got everything organized. Recently, we've started exploring the neighborhood, and I didn't expect to encounter something this unsettling. When I first started illustrating ghost stories, I used to attract odd experiences more easily. Lately, I thought those strange vibes were behind me, but clearly, I was wrong. That morning, my husband, baby, and I had just finished breakfast, and decided to visit a nearby tourist factory. There was a park next to it, and we thought our little one would love running around there. So, we decided to check it out. But as soon as we reached the park entrance, I felt something was off. The park was run down and overgrown, with weeds everywhere. Scavengers had claimed part of the space, piling up broken cardboard and trash near the entrance. Even the signboard was buried under a mess of junk. I hesitated, but my husband said, "We're already here. Let's just take a look." We parked by the entrance and started walking along a winding path. It was noon on a sunny day, with no shadows or obstructions. The trees on either side of the path grew neatly, not blocking the view. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that this path was unnerving. I walked ahead of my husband to check if the area inside was safe for our baby. Halfway down the path, I noticed a large, decrepit temple to the side, a Wan Ying Gong temple, a temple dedicated to wandering spirits without proper burial. It looked ancient and neglected, with peeling red paint. The moment I saw the temple, an unexplainable tightness gripped my chest. Then, out of nowhere, an intense headache struck me, as if someone was pressing their thumbs hard against my brow bones. My head felt constricted, and the pain was so sharp that my left eye wouldn't open. Even the right side of my face started to throb. I stopped in my tracks, panicking, and an overwhelming thought hit me. We shouldn't be here. It was just past noon, and I noticed someone sitting under a tree further down the path, casually looking at their phone. They seemed completely indifferent to the surroundings, but my fear only grew stronger. Struggling through the pain, I turned back and called out to my husband. "My head hurts. Let's go." When I looked back, I saw my husband standing near the Wan Ying Gong temple, holding our daughter in his arms. He joked.
Looks like Mommy's sensing something.
The moment he said that, a surge of fear washed over me, and the pain in my head became unbearable, spreading down the right side of my face and even to my jaw. My lips trembled, and my stomach twisted in nausea. Gritting my teeth, I snapped, "Let's just go home." We rushed back toward the car, but as we approached, my daughter suddenly refused to move. Normally, she's very well behaved, but at that moment, she was like a completely different child, screaming, struggling, and refusing to get into the car. I was terrified. I ended up forcing her into the seat and buckling her in. Even in the car, my headache didn't let up. Cold sweat poured down my face, and my hands and feet started shaking. My husband, still clueless, casually remarked,
Maybe you've got heat stroke?
That set me off. I shouted, "Shut up!" He finally stopped talking. As we drove away, I could feel something heavy, almost oppressive, watching us. That weight didn't lift until we were far from the park. But the strangest thing, the moment we crossed the line out of the parking lot and onto the main road, my headache disappeared completely. We immediately stopped by a nearby land god temple to pray. While we were there, I scolded my husband, still angry about his joke. Why on earth would you say something like that? Were you inviting any spirits nearby to confirm I could sense them? Then, he admitted something that sent chills down my spine. Right after he made that comment, he started having a headache too. He also told me something I hadn't noticed earlier because I was walking ahead. When he and our daughter reached the Wan Ying Gong temple, she had walked up to the entrance and started talking, like she was speaking to someone inside. Once we got home, our daughter calmed down, but she clung to my leg the entire afternoon, refusing to let go. At one point, she began mumbling softly, repeating, "Mommy, Daddy, big sister, go." My heart sank. What big sister? When I mentioned this incident to some friends later, they explained that Wan Ying Gong temples are dedicated to unclaimed souls, wandering spirits forgotten and without family. Maybe we disturbed something there. Perhaps the big sister just wanted to leave with us. Since that day, I haven't gone back to that area. I still remember the crushing weight of fear and my daughter's innocent words. Some places, I've learned, are better left alone. That's it for today's story. Experiencing something like this at noon left me utterly shaken. In 5 years of drawing ghost stories, this was the first time I truly understood what people mean when they say a bad energy field gives them severe headaches. Except for the last part about my daughter at home, everything else happened exactly as I've described. What do you think? Was it just a bad energy field? Or was there really something strange going on? Or maybe I was just unwell at the time. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see my videos faster, please like and subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates.